Hello and welcome to Raise Your Vibes with your host, Miriam Khan. I've been wanting to do this particular podcast for some time and I've had to reflect on it. I've had to stand back and look at it from different perspectives, but it's a podcast that really does need to be spoken about, and it's a podcast that I'm sure many people can resonate with, can refer to, can look back at and reflect on. And I think it's also a podcast that might end up being quite timeless. So the title is basically, you can't help everybody, especially if they're not ready to help themselves. Now, what do I mean by that? Because the way that we're brought up, the way that we are designed, the way that we're programmed, the way that our community builds us, the way that our neighborhood, our culture, our traditions, our welfare, our nature versus nurture aspects and dynamics of the people around us always has us looking at this viewpoint that, we really should be helping mankind or womankind, helping our fellow community, helping people that are at the side of us and helping the people that are in our groups, in our circles, in our communities, worldwide, globally. And of course, it goes without saying that we have to do that as human beings. We're taught from a very, very young age not to be selfish, not to be egotistical, not to be, on this journey of globalization or sort of capitalism or searching for wealth and goals. There's all these different dynamics. We are taught from a young age to love thy neighbour. Doesn't matter which culture you're from, that aspect is drilled into us. And it's closer still when that love thy neighbour goes deeper, when it's family, or maybe it's not even blood ties itself. It's people you consider to be family, or people that you are within your inner circle as you consider to be family, And people will face very hard, difficult hardships in that journey. They will face some moments of surrender, moments of hardships, moments of troubled times, moments of clarity, moments of breaking points. From listening into my podcasts, I've discussed many, many, many different topics that have arisen over time. Mental health, disability, special needs, love, friendships, breakups, divorce, narcissism, mental health in all aspects and all different fields. And it's not always easy to turn away when someone needs help. But what do you do when you're trying to help someone that you can see clearly needs that help, And there has to be a point sometimes when, unfortunately, you put your energy into that person, you try to rebuild them, you try to support them, you try to help them numerous times. And I mean numerous times, to stand on their own 2 feet, to have some clarity, to have some independence. But there comes a point as well, sometimes, that friendship, that sisterhood, that brotherhood, whatever you've termed that as, the neighbour, there are times when it unfortunately comes to a breaking point. And for your own sanity's sake, for your own mental health sake, for your own clarity's sake, you have to walk away. Now think about that, because these are not easy options. These are not easy relationships to walk away from sometimes. Because you've invested time, effort, money, wisdom, your whole soul sometimes into that person, and you've not necessarily put that energy into you. You might have sacrificed some financial aspects, some physical aspects, time aspects. Time is one of those things that's so expensive we don't realize it as a commodity, But it is, because you sacrifice certain things to put someone else's needs first. And you do that at times because you see that person going through hardships. You can relate to them. You can put yourself in an empathetic mode, sympathy mode. You put yourself in their shoes. Maybe you've been through the similar situation, similar heartache, similar steps as them. And also, maybe as a wiser soul, they don't necessarily see you as that sometimes, but as a wiser soul, you're trying to save them the same heartbreak and the same pain that either you've experienced or someone close to you has experienced. So when you're on your particular journey, you're trying really hard to avoid that pain for them. You're trying to keep them away from these aspects. You're trying to help them to be not making the same mistakes as you. You're trying to avoid the pitfalls of life. You're trying to help them be strong. You're trying to help them mold, and you're trying to help them to be tough, and you're trying to help them not to break. In the society we're living in 2022, it's very easy sometimes for people to fall into these loopholes of financial debt, of family debt, of living in trauma and repeat patterns of trauma. And they don't see the downfall. They don't see the pitfalls. They don't see the narcissistic sharks around them. And sometimes that person in the mirror looking back at them is their own worst enemy, because you can try and try and try till you're blue in the face, tell them that what they're doing is not right. You try to steer them onto the right path like a parent, I guess, and you try and steer them into the path of righteousness for them, not for you. It's not about your ego. You're trying to help them to be surviving, to be molded, to be escaping a very harsh reality of perhaps living on the streets, perhaps having their child taken from them, perhaps losing their job, perhaps being in an unfortunate situation where they're having to live with toxic parents, or worst case scenario, just not having a roof over their head. You know, maybe being in a battered shelter, maybe not even being in a shelter, living rough on the streets. There are different types of comforts that are taken from us when we're vulnerable. And as someone who personally has been homeless, you know, it's something I've never, ever forgotten in my life. And my friends will say to me, remember though, you had this with you and you had this with you. Yeah, I had some things viable, like financial support, because I had the hindsight or foresight, whatever you want to call it, to be prepared. But that doesn't mean I've forgotten that day, and it doesn't mean that I've forgotten that situation, because I never have. Even on a recent trip, I was meeting someone and I was talking to this gentleman who happened to be homeless. And it's interesting how many people will walk past somebody that's a beautiful soul like this gentleman was, and not stop and say hello, and not stop and ask how that person's day is going, and not ask how I might be able to help. Because people see them as being invisible, and they're not. They're part of us, they're part of our community. And it doesn't matter if that person is wanting $1, £1, whatever. The point is, are you giving a bit of your time? As I said, time is a very, important commodity. And there are people in this world that sometimes don't provide that time. Now, you can invest that time in someone to help them out of a dark hole, out of a situation that they need to be out of. And I've done that many, many times with various people in my life. And I always know, and I've always said it to myself, that when God, our creator, our spirit, whatever you want to believe in, puts me in touch with certain people, I always know that sometimes with that particular individual, there's an expiry date. And that isn't meant to sound rude, by the way. It's expiry date in the sense of I'm in that person's lifetime for as much as I'm meant to be there. Then they're meant to be by themselves. And sometimes that will come quicker than you think. And there are times when people will outmaneuver you, people will try to be righteous, and people try to be rude, and people will try and do very toxic things to alleviate you or to remove you from that situation. And what they forget sometimes is the person they're neglecting is not just themselves, it's the people around them, the vulnerable people around them, and each to their own. But there are times when you will do everything you can. And I've known many parents, many family members, many friends that have helped their siblings, they've helped their daughters, they've helped their sons, get back on their feet after toxic relationships, toxic situations that unfortunately life puts us in sometimes that are out of our control. And the other person really just doesn't appreciate the love and support and the kindness that that person has poured into them to make sure that, for example, they're still alive, to make sure that they still had a roof over their head, they had food in their stomach, when people around them wouldn't. And it's very interesting how very, very quickly some people can take that kindness that you've poured and poured and poured into that person to uplift them, to hold them, to mold them, to keep them from breaking. How quickly they can, very quickly, can turn it around and make it about you. And sometimes you have to take a step back, and you have to take a step back in the sense of you reflect and you see that this person really isn't ready to leave that narcissistic loophole they've got themselves into. They're not ready to leave that toxic mess they're in because they're happy staying in it. They're happy being part of it. They're happy being part of the circus. And this is where you sometimes have to make that very difficult decision to walk away and cut ties. And believe me, that's not as easy as you think sometimes. But for your own mental health, it's the right thing to do. I've helped many, many people in my life. They know who they are, and I wish them well. And I hope that in life, when they've had that energy from me, it's done them the world of good at the time. Because I'm the type of person, once I cut ties with you and it's over, you won't be hearing from me again. You can keep knocking at my door, you keep trying to get back in, but there'll be no response. Because once I'm done, I'm done. Maybe it's because I'm a Taurus and I'm the bull and I'm headstrong. Maybe it's because of my ethnic roots, my family roots, my genetic roots, where basically we're Pathans. And once we make our mind up, we're very strong-willed people and very headstrong. Very headstrong. And when somebody betrays us and we see it as a betrayal, that's it, we cut that tie. And that person is, to be fair, is lucky to be still standing. Because it takes a lot more strength to stay quiet and walk away than it does to verbally blast that person's head off. Because sometimes that doesn't need that energy. That energy doesn't need to resonate because you've said what you've needed to say. And sometimes very little words are more than enough. And I'm someone who chooses my words wisely. But when you're looking at the situation and you're reflecting on it, you can be angry, you can be full of grief, you can be full of remorse, or also you're just worried about certain outcomes too. And it gets to a point where you have to really just detach and let it be in God's hands, Creator's hands, whoever's hands, because you have to hand that burden back to someone else. It's not for you to carry. That person, whoever they are, whoever you've tried to help, sometimes in a very selfish manner, they don't see the toxic mess they're in. They really don't. And some people, seriously, you'll give them a wake-up call. You'll say to them, A, B, C, and D are doing this. You're in danger. It's critical. Be alert. Be aware. Come on, sort this simple thing out. Get yourself into a better routine. And sometimes these people are not stupid. They're educated enough to know. They understand they might be doing similar work in that outline. But they just refuse to let go because they enjoy the craziness a bit too much. And if you've listened to some of my podcasts before, you'll know that some of this is out of patterns of behaviour. The toxicity is so much that they don't even know where to move. And they're trapped in all corners. They don't see it. They're like a deer in headlights. But also at the same time, they enjoy it too. And like I said, you can keep helping and helping and helping. Like I said, I've known people that are grown-ass adults. They're approaching late 40s and they've had the kids taken from them. They're in care. They don't care. They still have that party attitude and then pretending on social media, oh, I'm the best mum or dad of the year. No, you're not. Sorry to sound crude and rude. You're not. You're not, because these are just fake images you're doing to please yourself. It takes a lot more than a couple of pictures and taking someone out for a party to be a parent. There's a lot more involved. And it's retrospect sometimes that you look at where you're thinking to yourself, I've invested my personal time, I've invested my energy, but I've also made big sacrifices for that individual. And that's something you also personally have to live with too. And at the time, was it the right thing to do? Yes. At the time, was the investment in that person, whether it's financial, emotional, whatever you want to call it, mental, spiritual, religious, whatever investment you've made, was it worth it at that time? Yes. But also you wake up too. You have your eyes peeled back and you wake up. And each time you meet someone else that comes in your path, your eyes are a little bit more renewed, because you see the reality in front of you again. And you have to make quicker decisions. Do I help this person? Do I not? And it's sad to say that there are times when you have to walk away from some people and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And that's a sad state of facts. It's not about you being ignorant. It's not about you being rude or being unsocial or unhelping others. Sometimes it's also about preserving your energy, not in an egotistical way, not in a rude way, not in a hurtful way to others. It's about preserving you. Because sometimes we are enablers and sometimes we are carers and sometimes we are empaths. And these energy vampires that are out there are aware of that too. And there are some that take advantage. They think you're playing dumb. They think you don't know, but you know. But you have to sometimes see things with your own eyes as well. So sometimes you can't help everyone. You'll try your best. You'll try to support them. And sometimes your needs are not because of helping that individual. Maybe there is a young person involved. And maybe you can't help the adult, but you help the younger person that's in that particular environment. And that's fine. Sometimes it's those tools that are needed for that future generation to make a change. And it might be that that's the person that you make the most impact on, not the adult that's around them. And these are things you have to walk away with. That although you couldn't help the other adult, you could help the younger person to come out of this. And that's one of the things that's quite hard, when you're walking into relationships or friendships or sisterhoods or brotherhoods or whatever you want to call it maternally. These are things to be aware of. And people will keep repeatedly trying to help someone many, many times. And if they keep putting their hand in the fire, they're going to keep getting burnt. And eventually you'll get burnt too. And I guess that's what I'm saying. That in a spiritual way, in a physical way, in an emotional, mental health way, sometimes you can't help everybody. And there's times when you have to cut the line and you have to walk away and you have to close that door and you have to close that chapter. And you have to do so for your own mental health's sake. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not selfish. It's not rude. You're not being hurtful to others. As long as you're clear in your message and you're clear as to why you can no longer help that person, then that's what you have to do. And at the end of the day, it's putting boundaries in to protect your mental health and to protect your future and to protect your inner family. And there's nothing wrong with that. So that's a lesson learned. You can't help everyone. And unfortunately, we have to sometimes weigh it up, sometimes quickly, and some decisions could take us years to discover, where we walk away and say goodbye. And that's sometimes the moral message, You walk away, you say goodbyes, you close the door, and you focus on you. And when someone comes along that needs your help, you evaluate, you look at the situation and you decide, do I help this person or not? That's then down to you. You make that decision based on prior experience, from wisdom. Yes, I know it's a bit of an emotional one, but I'm sure this is something that we can all relate to. And again, like I said, be wise, be courteous, be respectful, but also be kind to yourself. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Miriam Khan at Raise Your Vibes.